ScaleUP, the podcast for driving growth in your MSP, delivered by industry experts.
Welcome to the first episode of scaleUP podcast. scaleUP podcast is all going to be about thought leadership. It's all about how we drive businesses forward and dedicated to MSPs, looking at how we drive and help you to move this business forward. And hopefully you'll take some snippets away and actually use this within your business. We're here at Halo House. I'm Darren Strong from Scalable MSP, and I've got Tim here, the CEO of HaloPSA, and we're hopefully going to give you content that you can go and move forward with your business.
So today we're going to talk about profitability and tracking profitability in your business, and how you can start that process.
So I think the key for me on profitability is that planning. And I know from our conversations that doesn't really fit with you guys, but for me in an MSP world, it's about planning and being intentional beforehand. So what I mean by that is we call it kicking the year off, right? So it's pointless us going into the financial year and being 3 months into that year and then telling the people in the business what you need them to succeed in, because you're already 3 months behind. So what you need to be doing is thinking about actually 3 months before your year end, what is next year going to look like? What's that budget going to look like? And what are those key things that we need to succeed in to get that profitability? Now, we've talked about culture, so that could be one of the key strategies. It doesn't have to be increasing revenue. It could be how do we actually get the culture better to equal that profitability? But the key for me is actually being intentional with planning for that, announcing that to the business, maybe even changing KPIs and all the other things around sales targets, etc., to make sure you're going into the year right, to make sure that you're actually going to set that off from the beginning. So we have a tool called Rule of 78, which basically means from an MRR growth, you're going to have 78 cells on a spreadsheet, and each one is a month. So we start off with month one, and let's say we need 2,000 MRR, £2,000. So month two, you're going to start with £2,000 and gain another £2,000. So that's 3 cells. Month three, we're going to start with £4,000 and we gain another £2,000. So if we're 3 months in before we actually announce this, well, it's not the rule of 78 anymore. We've got to take those 3, 4, 5 cells off here. And so that number, that target, has dramatically gone up just because you didn't communicate it, just because we're not all aiming for the right way. But I know you look at profitability way differently, and yours is all about how do we get the right people in the right place, driving the energy and growing.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, our perspective on profitability is that it's a journey-driven profitability rather than a destination, and that doesn't really always fit, I don't think, in the MSP world. So we do come at it with a different perspective. Because we're not reselling a product that we don't have control over. I mean, in the case of license reselling or something, you've got a fixed cost, you've got something, you have to make a margin on that. We're selling software that essentially doesn't cost that much to produce. So we have nothing driving how much we're selling that for or how we have to build this business model. So it is different to the MSP model, and it doesn't really translate. But I think you can take some of that journey-driven stuff and apply that to the MSP model, where you don't always have to be focusing on the next 3 months, 6 months. It can be 2-year planning, and that's when things like culture change can become more effective. Because a culture change, you can't make that happen in 3 months and see a profitability by the end of the quarter. That's got to be a long-term thing. So I think you can do both, and I think MSP should be doing both, where they're not just focusing on the profitability driven by cost and price, but actually all the kind of less tangible things that you can do around it.
Yeah, and we see a lot around operational gains. We follow a process called Lean Six Sigma that comes from car manufacturing. So how much time are you wasting duplicating efforts or spending time in meetings that aren't actually meetings? And I know that Paul, the owner of Halo, talks about he goes into a meeting and this meeting sounds like a meeting. It actually sounds like an email. It needs to be an email. And actually, why are we in these meetings? Why are we wasting time talking about it when we all should be sort of getting on with it? And if the culture's right, we should already be making the right decisions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that example, we don't really have meetings at Halo. I probably have one, maybe two a month. And it's pretty rare. It's if we actually need to spend half an hour discussing something. Normally it's much more effective to go and grab the person that needs to help you make that decision, and then you make the decision after a quick conversation. If that's not enough, you go and grab the third person, and that's it. And then hopefully that's enough. And it does cut down kind of the time you spend on meetings, increases everyone's efficiencies. So yeah, I think there's absolutely ways that you can increase your profitability that aren't directly price cost. Things like documentation as well. I think that's something that a lot of MSPs strive to be better at, and it can increase their profitability, because if you're documenting properly, the next person that comes along to try and solve the same issue, they can rely on someone that's already done it, rather than going through exactly the same steps again, wasting 20 minutes, half an hour. And that's something you can actually kind of use a PSA tool or any service desk tool to track, because you can start looking at, is your closure time going down for issues that all look the same? There's probably a whole nother discussion you could have on ChatGPT or AI models to help you get there better, get there quicker now that those are available. But those things can definitely help increase profitability.
I think that's a really key point, though, that actually what I see is we don't actually know certain profitability because we don't have the data. So we definitely probably know, or should know, the overall profitability of the business. But do we actually know at the right buckets the profitability? So what we see a lot of is you may be selling 10 services to a customer, but you only really know the overall profitability of that customer because you know how much you're selling them, and you know, hopefully, the time, which is the biggest cost as an MSP, that's going into that customer. And we know our rest of our overheads, so we probably know the profitability of that customer. But do we actually know the profitability of each service that we're actually delivering to customers? And that's then where we can really drive into tweaking those individual services to ultimately end up with the overall picture better. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't do when they're looking at systems and PSAs. They don't come from a point of view of what data do we want to drive the business on. They come from a operational process structure.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's probably because it is a bit intimidating, a bit scary to start thinking, how am I possibly going to break down the costs of every single service I offer and track all of that? But I don't think they need to do it in one big go. I think it's about maybe finding segments that you can pull apart and say, well, from intuition, I know that this bit probably isn't very profitable at the moment, so let's just focus on that and see if we can pull the data for that small segment of the business and start working on increasing the profitability of that bit. But it is really important that they start, because the longer you leave it, the more likely you are to get into a position when it's too late. Because one of the reasons Halo, I guess, gets away with not tracking profitability that carefully is that we're growing and we're expanding, and it's good at the moment. But as soon as that changes, that profitability data is really important, because that's when you can really start saying, right, we need to stop this, increase this. And if you're not capturing that early on, by the time you need it, it's too late.
Yeah, I think you're sort of doing it a bit more like a secret ninja. So you're not wording it as tracking profitability, but you're tracking service requests. You're tracking how much time all of that takes. You're tracking how efficient you are in that. I know we've had conversations about running a lean ship. You run a lean ship, so you're not actually labeling it as profitability, but you are directly pulling levers that equal profitability.
Yeah, we are. Like we were chatting about it earlier, and we're very careful about our spend, and we've always been very careful about our spend, because that's the easiest thing that we can control. Because even if we're not bringing in new licenses, not making money from consulting or whatever it is, at least we can keep our costs low. And we're in a bit of a privileged position that we make the software. So again, it's a bit different to an MSP because they're having to resell a lot of things. But because we have that, we can keep control of our costs really easily.
Yeah, I mean, a big change for me in my main MSP that I was in was a solution that allowed us to benchmark ourselves. So typically what we were doing is we were selling on the cost. We was having sales conversations and prospecting conversations about it's going to cost this much, and the guy next door is costing this much. So all we were doing is driving down to that bottom line lower and lower and lower. What actually happened to us was a benchmarking tool that allowed us to look at the top performing MSPs, and them's what we want it to be. And so now it's not us as a business saying we want X percentage of profitability from a service. We're saying that 5,000 MSPs, the top quartile performing MSPs, their average is this.
Yeah.
And so now we want to achieve that. So it almost changes your slant of saying, actually, we believe the local area can only sell IT at £20 an hour, when actually we shouldn't be looking at the sale price. We should be looking at how much is it costing us to deliver it, what's the profit we want to gain on top of that, and is that price now too high? If that price is too high, then we have to make ourselves more efficient to drive that price down, but we're not going to jeopardize the profitability of that service. And I think that's what I see a lot. I mean, I'm not sure what you see in the industry, but it's sort of everyone's driving to be the cheapest in the area, and that's the real wrong strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the ones that will very quickly find themselves in trouble. Because when the economy turns, when something shifts, you're suddenly working with no margin. And even if you've got a large number of customers and your revenue's high, your profit's low. And that's when you're going to be in trouble, essentially. And I think it's a much better long-term strategy to focus on keeping that profit nice and healthy, so that when they do go wrong, you can actually kind of take on those costs and see it through.
Yeah, I think it's about being intentional as well with your decision making. So typically a lot of business owners are making decisions because they're on the front line. They're making reactive decisions, and they're not really thinking about what does that mean to the business finances. They're just making very quick decisions on the fly because they're in the business, and they're not spending a lot of time on the business looking at that data. And so before they know it, they're in a situation that they didn't want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I've been at Halo for 12 years, and my position wasn't always running HaloPSA. It was starting off as a support technician, essentially, and being a software developer. And the switch when you do move into a C-level or an executive role is massive, and it completely changes your perspective on what's important and how you're going to make the business succeed. Because you're no longer down there in the trenches worrying about the next day, this consulting session, how's that going to work? Are we going to get this bug fixed? Which does get in the way of long-term planning. So I think for those MSPs that are at the size where the leadership team or the owner's still involved very heavily on the day-to-day, they would benefit from taking a step back. Long term, their team will actually be a better team for it, and the company's going to be much more successful for them to do that. It won't feel like that in the moment. You might feel like you're abandoning your team, that you're abandoning your customers, but actually in 2 years, your company's going to be so much further forward because you're there to actually kind of steer the ship properly and make long-term decisions.
So thinking of another angle then of profitability is definitely that technology stack for me. So a lot of partners we work with, they don't really have a grip on the technology stack. And I think there's two angles to a technology stack. There's one, what are we delivering to our customers? And then there's another one of internal technology stack. And I think both of them get very much out of hand. And so especially for, if we think about that customer technology stack, if we believed we was going to put in backup solution that would take X amount of time to consume and manage that backup stack, is that actually doing that? Are we actually delivering that on the front line? Or is there installation problems? Have we chosen the wrong engine? Have we got some sort of configuration issue? But if we're not tracking that, then we're not aware of that. And if we're doing that across all that stack with a customer, regular, and making sure we're intentional with that, we can drive profitability by not changing anything else in the business. And then when we're on an internal front, every MSP owner loves a new shiny toy. And so, I'm sure you see it in sort of when you've been doing implementations and consulting, the actual amount of those shiny toys, but actually what they're delivering is like 5-10% into the business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely two different sides to that, and I think what people need to recognize is that just starting the journey of tracking profitability is important, and you don't have to do all of it 100% straight away, because you pick up that book on profitability, or you see a webinar, or I don't know, you speak to people in your peer group and you find out how well they're tracking it, and all of a sudden you want to go from 0 to 100, and that's not realistic, because some of these tools don't integrate well into billing solutions, into PSA tools, so you can't automatically track costs. And some of them you can, but they're very, very complicated to set up because of how the costs change. So I think it's important that that MSPs recognize that you don't have to track everything on day one. Like the backup solution, that's a perfect example. If you could segment that in your strategy and start reporting just on the cost to your business, the cost of supplying that service, because then you can work out if it's profitable enough. And then once you've got that down, that's perfect. You can leave that now. As long as you're not making loads of changes to the back end, you've got some profitability metrics set up for backup, and maybe we move on to the next service. And then when you've done a few, you can start making comparisons. And actually, is there any point us really pushing this service? Because we're barely making any money on it. Let's push this high performer instead. So I think as long as they're starting, and as long as it's rough and you've got some idea of comparison, that's something to work with. It doesn't have to be the gold standard straight away.
Yeah, just you was tracking 0, now you're tracking 10%.
Yeah.
And I think you're right there about that, moving on to each one and making sure you're just systematically going through each one, and eventually you'll create a bigger picture. But now we're creating data that we can start to track.
Yeah, and if they're comparing themselves to maybe the bigger, more mature MSPs in their peer group, they shouldn't expect to be able to get to that level very quickly, because some of these guys have got teams of 5 or 10 Power BI developers integrating all this data so they can see it on a dashboard, and you don't need to do that straight away. That's what you're seeing there is the end goal of a large mature business spending years on this stuff and building out a team. So there's value in it. Yes, you can see that. They wouldn't be doing that otherwise. That's part of why they're so successful, but you don't need to do it day one. It can just be someone pulling in that data, whether it is Power BI or an Excel spreadsheet or just a reporting tool. Starting on that is going to be a really important step.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a thing there that actually we're really passionate about actually, we hear a lot. We hear from peer groups, we read books, we look at around the industry, and instantly we knee-jerk to that thing and we want that 100%. But actually, we're really passionate about, is this the right time on your journey? Is this going to fit your business? And is it actually capable at this moment in time? We see it a lot with even solutions people start to provide, back-end data they need, where actually that's not the right move for them. A great example is sort of sales strategies. You've took that strategy from somebody that's got a 8-9 man sales team that's been going years, and you're doing principal-led selling and you're trying to do the same strategy. It's a great strategy, but it's not the one for you. There's like 10 steps behind that is now the one for you.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be the right strategy for your business at that time in your journey. And you can have aspirations to end up like that in 5 years' time or something like that. But you have to make sure it's the right thing for you. Because, we could make the same mistakes as a software company where we see people using all kinds of tools to drive their marketing, drive their sales. But they're not us. They're not doing it in the way we are. So we shouldn't be going out and just buying these nice shiny tools just because everyone else is. So just get the profitability, yes, but make sure you're giving a little bit of thought to what you're actually going to do with that data. Is it something that I'm going to find useful? Is it achievable for my company at the moment?
Yeah, and I think it's really key as well that is actually spread across the business. So even ourselves in our own business, we do a monthly all stand-up business meeting, and a good chunk of that meeting is actually showing those details. It's showing that here's where we are, here's why we are here, and also giving them some coaching about what does that number mean, because they need to understand some of the business figures and the structure of that to understand what you're going to do next. And that creates so much power when everybody's driving that direction. You see that here in Halo House, that everybody's got the same energy and the same drive to drive that forward.
Yeah, I think that comes back to something we spoke about right at the start. We're talking about culture, and because that's a culture thing that a lot of businesses won't have. That a lot of MSPs won't be sharing that data with the wider team. The problem with that is no one really then understands their impact on the business, which that's got two sides to it. One of them is they're probably going to be a bit more liberal. They're not going to be as careful with what they're doing because they probably think, this doesn't matter anyway. They don't understand what impact their actions are actually having on the bottom line for the company. The other side of that is that they also don't feel as involved. If they don't know the costs and the profit and the price of everything in the business and why they're doing it, they're not going to feel part of the business. They're just going to feel like, a cog in the machine rather than actually being part of that have that machine properly and understanding how it works.
Yeah, I think it's great what we talked about earlier about when you're doing something as an event for the business, you're treating it like your own money because you understand where the business is and you understand where the business needs to go. And so you're aligning that with that spend.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've always had that, or tried to kind of impress upon that on our staff, that see it as your own money. Do you think that would be sensible to spend that much money? Sometimes, because it's your own money, sometimes it's fine to be a bit frivolous and spend a bit more and have fun or whatever. But generally, you want to be a bit careful. And yeah, we try and get that across as a cultural thing to our everyone that works at Halo.
Yeah, I think that fun bit as well needs to come into it. That typically what we see in the MSP industry is that the leaders especially are very action driven. They want to go the next action. We've won that, let's move on to the next thing. But actually people need to celebrate. So when you've hit some of those data points and those profitability points, you need to celebrate as a team. People need to know that we got there and we're going to all reap that reward and we're all going to celebrate.
Yeah, definitely. I think celebrating hitting a milestone is really important, because there's a celebration side, but there's also what happens just after it, where it's resetting you and saying, right, let's go again. That's done now. Let's forget about that. We've got another target and let's push on to go and get that next one. Because if you're not, it just feels like it's a constant battle and you're not really getting anywhere. So it's definitely important to take the time to celebrate the wins.
So I think in summary, Tim, what we're talking about is when people talk about increasing profitability, there's actually lots of different ways of increasing profitability. It's not just about let's increase revenue. And also, we just need to start. We just need to start tracking that data. Any bits of that data to whatever level you are on your journey, let's just start tracking it so then we can move levers and have discussions about that data.
Yeah, exactly. I think the key takeaway is start somewhere. Make a start, and in 6 months you can add to it. In a year you can add to it, and at some point you'll have a really good data set there that can drive your business. Don't think you can do it all in one day. It's just not possible. It's not feasible. It's not going to be the right thing for you to do. But as long as you're making a start, you're going in the right direction.